Hey guys, Scott here. I was in bed browsing Twitter because that's how I search for my amazing content on my channel, and I came across a tweet by Hens who just asked the simple question, is Dead by Daylight past its prime? If the answer is yes, when were the glory days? And I thought this was an interesting discussion because when I originally thought about the question, I thought, well, when is DBD in its prime? Well, like, when was the game in the best state that it's been in? And I would say probably either now or maybe right before Made for This came out. In terms of balance and community reception and things like that, I would say the game is close to the best state that it's actually ever been in. But when I started reading the responses here, it seemed like the definition of what its prime is, it tends to vary between the person that you ask. And actually, it seems like the consensus from most people is that the prime of the game is not when the game was in its best state. It's when collectively the most people were just having fun with it. And I thought that's an interesting discussion because it doesn't necessarily have to do with how good or bad the game was at the time. It's just when people had the fondest memories of it. And the problem with that is when you have, nostalgia and memories of the past and things like that, you sort of ignore the negative things that were happening around there too because you just remember the positive stuff, and that's sort of how it works. So the prime for a lot of people was actually when the game was in a pretty bad state in some form or another. In fact, if you ask a lot of veteran players when they think the prime of their glory days of the game was, it was going to be something around 2016 or 2017 when the game was an absolute buggy, just unplayably broken mess. But that's still when people had their fondest memories of the game. And that's just because when something is new, it's going to be more interesting. It doesn't matter how fun something is. If you repeatedly do it over and over and over, it just stops becoming fun. You get desensitized to the fun, just like you become desensitized to the horror aspect of the game. It just stops doing that once you do it over and over again. And the problem is, Dead by Daylight has a finite amount of new players that will know about it and play it. Most people that have heard of Dead by Daylight and that were planning on playing it have already played it at some point. It's not like someone's heard about it for 7 or 8 years and then now they thought, you know what, now I am going to try this game. It does happen, but that's not really super common anymore. So we're at this state where all the people that were going to put their hours into it already have, and they've quit for one reason or another, and their initial response to that is, well, I don't find the game fun anymore, so the glory days were when I played because that's when I found it fun. The thing is, you probably found it more fun because it was newer and exciting to you, not because the game itself was actually more fun. But then that's a weird discussion because now we're just going off people's subjective opinions. And, some survivors found running infinites in 2016 super fun. Some killers found stacking for the same perk over and over again to be super fun. And, there are a lot of times when the game is not even functional, but that's when people have the most fun with it. So, yeah, it's a weird conversation. I think the actual answer to this question is Dead by Daylight was in its prime when people collectively just found it the most fun personally themselves. And that answer can wildly vary depending on who you ask. But if we try to get a general consensus amongst people, it would typically be between the 2017 to 2019 days, because that's when the game started fixing a lot of issues, but also the game was still pretty new and fresh, and we were still getting new and exciting licenses, and the core gameplay loop of the game had not burned people out yet. So it's really just a balancing act of when the game started getting good changes compared to when people were just not burnt out of the concept of DBD yet. So going forward from here, is Dead by Daylight past its prime? I think if we go by that definition, yeah, it's absolutely past its prime. It will never get that ever again. The only way they could get that is if they introduce like custom game modes or something drastic. Some drastic gameplay change that I don't think they'll ever actually add, because people have already tried the core formula, they played it, they had their fun with it, and now it's no longer fun, no matter how good you make the game. Because I can't stress enough, balance-wise, this game is as close to perfect as it's ever been. There's a couple of outliers like Made for This, and some maps are still really busted one way or the other. But compared to what we had even 3-4 years ago, it is insane how much more fair the game is. But fair doesn't always equal fun. And some people like being on the stronger side. And the thing is, because DBD was balanced in such a strange way, the stronger side could be both killer and survivor at the same time. You could have killers with, Rune Undying Tinkerer in that phase, or Call of Brine Eruption Overcharge, there was that phase, or you could have survivors in their phase when they had Genuine Infinites or Vacuum Pallets, old DS. Like everyone had broken shit at some point, and that's probably when they found the game most fun, when they could use their own broken shit against other people. So when you have this thing where you actually balance the game, the highs and lows start coming closer together, and while more balanced, it sort of stagnates the gameplay and there's less exciting or ridiculous moments. And yeah, it's more fair, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's more fun. So that is, I think, the main discussion there. Is DBD past its prime? Yes, it can never get to that point again, just due to the fact that the most people that were going to have played the game have already played it, and no matter what they do, they're never going to recapture the initial experience they had playing the game. That's impossible. You cannot beat nostalgia. So yes, it's past its prime. We can't ever change that. The game, however, is in a very good state in terms of balance. Even the community responses have been a lot better. Their PR guy, Eric Pope, he was a very, very good dude. He worked on For Honor for a while too, in terms of being like community response and stuff like that. And he was very good at that. So they seem to be taking responses and taking community feedback very, very quickly and very well. They still occasionally have their standard behavior response. It's a problem. You don't know when we're going to fix it, but it does seem like they're listening a lot more. And I don't know, the maps are mostly balanced for the, most part. Perks are mostly balanced for the most part. There's a lot of weak perks and there's stronger perks, but none of them are actually insane, again, other than like made for this. And yeah, the game feels like it's in a very good spot, but I don't think it's the most fun it's ever been. I'm not having an immense amount of fun with it. And typically, if I would take a break and come back, then I would start having more fun again. So it really is just down to your personal memories of when the game was the most fun. Not at all when the game was actually good. It's just when you enjoyed benefiting from whatever thing was fun at the moment. So it's an interesting question. Curious to hear what your guys' thoughts on it, because it drastically varies depending on what you even interpret its prime as, and then who you ask, what role you play, things like that. So curious to hear you guys' response. Thanks for watching.